My name is Paul Fischer. I'm with Intel. One of my Intel colleagues here is Tony in the audience. You can accost him with questions afterwards as well. If you were at DevConf earlier this week, you may have had an opportunity to come by and see the Intel XDK. If not, I'm going to try and give you an overview. I'm not going to go through the process of creating an app, and help you assemble an app or so forth. I'm assuming that the crowd here is familiar with Cordova, knows what a hybrid app is, knows what plugins are and that sort of thing. So I'm really just going to talk about this from the perspective of what does it mean for somebody who is or wants to be a Cordova developer. What's maybe the difference between using this and CLI or something like that. And honestly, I would prefer that you ask questions as we go along here, and I'll repeat the question so the recording can hear it, and anyone here, in case they couldn't hear it, can hear what I'm saying or hear what was asked. So, but just a quick overview. We refer to it as, a lot of people refer to it as an IDE. I like to consider it to be something that can coexist with other tools. So one really important point about the Intel XDK is it's not an attempt to replace everything that you've been doing. It's really meant to augment. And in particular, it's meant to help supplement the debug and build process of using Cordova. So there's a lot of, so for those of us who are comfortable on the command line and like to use the command line, you can still, in fact, use this in conjunction with that process. It does replace some of that, in some respects to an advantage, other cases to a disadvantage, and if I remember, I'll try to explain what I mean by that. But it fundamentally brings a bunch of tools together that you may or may not be using as part of your Cordova build, development process, and gets it easier access. And this is really significant, I think, for developers who aren't command line savvy or don't want to be command line savvy, or really their sphere is more just pure web development, and they want something like this to help them through that process. So I see it as a way of helping to expand the Cordova PhoneGap user base, by providing this kind of a tool. Now, as you know, it's not the only kind of tool like this out there. We saw a nice presentation from Telerik, very nice, their Icenium tool. Then PhoneGap Build has some bits and pieces to this, and there's other folks out there that have things that utilize Cordova on the back end. Usually it's much more mysterious on the back end for most of the other tools. This one's blatant that it's Cordova, as is PhoneGap Build, and as is the Telerik thing. Most of the others, they tend to hide it a little bit from you. The tool itself, I'm going to switch back and forth between some screens here. I'm hoping this is readable enough, but you don't need to read the fine print. It's not that important. Way the tool is organized today, you see there's a couple tabs here. There's a develop, which is more basically like an editing tab. It's got a few extra features I'll probably go into a little bit. Emulate, which is really Ripple emulator with some augmentation done by Intel. Test, which is essentially Winery debugger. Debug, which is specifically an Intel thing utilizing Crosswalk and remote Chrome dev tools. And then Profile I won't go into, but I'll try to explain what it is. And then the build. So we'll try to go through all of those. And again, for those who are just arriving, if you have questions, ask the questions as I'm going through. I prefer to just help leads the presentation. I only have a couple slides here. I'm mostly just going to be kind of interactive, and I want to make sure that I'm answering the questions, that I'm addressing the concerns and questions that people have, or that people, information that people want to know. So don't be afraid to speak up. Just interrupt me. And as you can tell, I have this tendency to just keep on talking and not provide a break point for you to ask a question. So you're going to have to be rude. And actually, I'm the one being rude by not giving you those breakpoints, so please just interrupt me, raise your hand, whatever, and I'll acknowledge you. I will make a point of looking at the audience on a regular basis, so I do see a hand raised. If I see a white hand that's, you know, like limp and everything, I'll know that I have not been looking at the audience for a while. Oh, and on that last one, you see there's a little bit, there's a little note down there about debug Internet of Things. So we've actually got a variation of this tool that's meant for working with what's now currently called IoT devices. I'm not going to go into that. If you do want to talk about that, we can talk about it later, what it means and so forth. The fundamental purpose of this tool is HTML5 Cordova hybrid apps. That's its prime purpose right now. The other thing is, I'll try to explain later. So, as you know, Cordova is a multi-form factor platform, you know, for HTML5 apps. I went through a quick summary of the various pieces and parts that are here for debugging and testing. So we'll go into some of those in the middle box. The part that I'm unfortunately the worst at demonstrating is the layout tool and the services part of it. I'll try to do my best, but I will not do it full justice because I don't spend enough time with it, unfortunately, that part of it, unfortunately. So if you want to download it, there's a link down there at the bottom, xdk.intel.com. That's the easiest way to find it. It's just kind of a landing page, and you see there's a download link there. The tool is free. It will install on, it's based on Node WebKit, so it's designed to run on a Linux box, on a Windows box, and on a Mac box. It looks, I'm running it right now. I'm running on a Mac. You notice I'm running Fusion over here. My slides are running in Windows, but I could actually start it up here in the Windows boxes too, and it would look exactly the same as this, other than, you know, the frame around the OS frame that's around the outside. It has identical functionality on each of those platforms. And so in addition to it being free to download and free to use, there's no royalties associated with apps that you create. They're your property. We don't insert any stuff into them or, you know, try to claim some sort of rights or anything like that. Those are your apps. You do, as I was answering a question for Tommy here, you do have to create a login. We will not be spamming you. You might get an email, say every few months or every 6 months if there's an important issue or if there's an important update or something that you should be made aware of. But in general, it's really rare that you would receive an email. So don't worry about your email address is now going to, you know, be in Intel's hands. We actually have an extremely tight policy with regard to emails and privacy and so forth. We probably go over the edge with that. So you tend not to, unless you've explicitly signed up for a newsletter or something like that, you're not, this isn't going to get transferred to some sort of mail list like that. So don't worry about that. So we'll get into the part here right away now that's I'm the least good at, but I'll try to do my best for you. One thing, there's a program editor in here, an HTML5 editor in here. If you may or may not recognize it to be brackets. It's actually the brackets editor. In fact, there's a curated list of plugins that you can install in this thing. Hang on. You cannot install all, well actually if you go in and you do some dicking around, you can actually find where these things are. So you can sideload some if you wanted to, but fundamentally, so I've got a screen squeeze going on here, which is causing a little bit of overlap of stuff for this projector. But there's a list of what I call curateds, and the most important ones to install on here probably would be the Git one is really, really handy. It's a really nice extension for brackets. And then there's a couple of hint and lint plugins that will check your CSS, JavaScript, and even your HTML. And they're very, very handy too because they help find, and they're very good. But one thing I want to say is that, so you can install those. And if you've got one that you request, let us know, and we'll take a look at it, make sure that it's going to work within here, because this is it's it's a confined, it's an encapsulated addition of brackets. So there's some plugins that don't play well in this particular environment. So that's why we don't just let you install any one you want. So we've tried to include a bunch that we think are useful. But if you've got one that you think really would be very valuable, let us know, and we'll try to get it added to the list. Generally, the engineer who is part of that is pretty responsive, and we can get them in there pretty quick. We generally are doing a release about every 6 to 8 weeks, so it doesn't take too long for it to show up, but it won't be tomorrow, So that's Brackets Editor. If you want to use your own editor with the source, you are welcome to. The project actually just lives in directories on your system. So this is not a cloud-based tool per se, even though we do perform some of the testing is facilitated by a cloud service, and the build is done with cloud services, which I'll get into later. But other than that, everything else is done locally on your system. So your project can live on your hard drive, and there's not a whole lot of requirements on that project directory. It's we have a couple of files we put in there that just kind of are IDs for the XDK, and then we just need to know where your index HTML is located, and that's where all of your other stuff. It has a similar layout to think of it as a simplified Cordova CLI project. So it's pretty familiar if you're already using CLI. And as we're moving forward, there's other things we're adding, which we intend to maintain like a coexistence with CLI and other tools, but it's not CLI on the local disk here. However, you can take a CLI project that you've got and point the XDK to it, and then use the tools in here to play with your sources and even build with it. But if you want to build locally, then you're going to have to make sure you configure your config XML to match what you've done. So it doesn't like automatically read or update your config XML file to make sure it matches, but it won't interfere with your sources in the CLI project, so you can have them overlaid and work with them. I've got a couple projects on here that are set up that way, and you can't tell the difference. So I've got a really ugly, yeah, it's very ugly. But so this is, I think I've got something that's a little prettier. Let's bring the prettier one up first. So if you have an existing app, can you just open it, or do you have to recreate? If you have an existing app, it's possible to just there's an import. For example, I can start a new project and I can import. All the import's going to do, it doesn't actually change anything in your file. It's just going to point to where's the project directory, and then once I do that, it's going to, you'll want to manually set up this source directory. So for example, in this particular, oops, hang on. You see right here, here's my project path for this particular project. And then I've also got a directory that's inside that project called www. And that's where my actual sources live. And those are actually the only files from a app perspective that the tool cares about. That's where RESTful is going to look for your files. That's where the test tools are going to look for your files. That's where the build system is going to look for your files. And then outside of that, there's a few special files that the XDK uses just to kind of keep track of the name and some of this information.
Now, because when you build it from the command line, you build platform, iOS, Android, whatever, and those are different directory files. So pull this in here, not keep my code. But will it look for both of those?
So the question is, if you've got an existing CLI project and you've got the different platforms that you've pulled in, we only care about the original source, the www directory. So we're ignoring all those platform and plugin directories and so forth. So that's why I say you can overlay it, but if you're going to continue to use CLI on the project, you're going to have to manually maintain and do your Cordova, add and so forth at the command line. So it's not taking over that Cordova project. Rather, it's just by pointing to that www directory, you can then use these test tools in here and some of those things to work with your project. But you might still want to build locally if that's maybe you modified something about the Cordova framework, which you can't do with our cloud-based solution. So, so you're in this hybrid development land, but you can lay it on top of, but it's not going to take over. It's going to just now use your sources for our process, but it won't interfere with what you're doing with CLI. So you can kind of take the sources and run them through both processes and not worry about one clobbering the other.
Let me know if my question is jumping ahead, but
no.
So let's say that you don't want any problems, so you're just going to start brand new with your project.
Yes,
okay?
you're going to start brand new with a new project.
Okay, so then you just cut and paste whatever your JS and HTML code is. When you build, how do you tell which platform you're building?
That's something I'll get into later. So the question was, I've got a new project, how do I tell what I'm going to build for and so forth? I will cover that, yeah. So let me see if I can find my, my prettier one here. You can see I've got way too many for forum work and so forth. I think it's this one. No, it's not that one. Sorry. Speak among yourselves. Yes. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I've got, as you can see, a little bit of squeeze going on here with my screen. So let me see if I can push that to the side. So this is, it's not a very interesting app, but this is just to show this layout tool. So there's a UI layout tool that's included with this. Now again, you're not required to use this. It's there for your convenience if you want to use it to do some layout and design. But if you've got a layout tool that you like using, use it. I mean, because we're talking about just standard web apps, Cordova web apps, so we're not restricting the nature of the libraries or the pieces and parts that you use as your in your app. As long as it's copacetic for Cordova apps, it'll be fine in here. This is a convenience, something that you can use. It does generate, in some cases, a little bit of what can appear to be a little incomprehensible code, but so it has a standard column row layout that it's applying, a matrix or grid layout that it's applying. So it's applying its own set of rules. It's not specifically using Bootstrap or what's the other? There's a couple other popular ones. It's using something of its own design. Yeah, it's similar to those. So you will see when you start one of these projects, if I start a new project and I start with App Designer, let's just call it, and there's probably something already with this name, yeah. Sorry about that. When you do start out fresh, it's supposed to ask me. Oh, I guess I already had a project with that name. Well, you can see here, it's going to ask for one of four. I'm sure there's not a 5. Okay. So it's going to ask me which one of these 4 frameworks I want to use. Actually, all it's asking you is which one of the widget sets from these 4 frameworks. So it's not using the Bootstrap layout grid layout tools. It's just using the widgets within it and the CSS theming themes that are in it. Like what and App Framework is a mobile specific, mobile optimized framework, UI layout framework that one of the Intel developers, actually out of Pennsylvania, has developed, and we use, and it works quite well. And he's in the process of doing a significant upgrade to that, which will, I think, make for a much nicer framework to work with. But you can use any one of these. So if you're using jQuery Mobile, you're using a part of jQuery Mobile, and a lot of people will choose the jQuery Mobile thinking that they're going to now then go in by hand and do it, but you've got a lot of additional structure around that, and so it doesn't actually turn out that you can then go and play with it by hand. But you can do a fair amount of editing and so forth, and it'll still read in as it'll do its best to continue to read in what you've got there. There's a few things you can do to break it, but most of the time you can edit the code that it generates or add to the code that it generates and still be safe. So it's not a one-way trip. It's actually a round trip layout tool. But again, it's not a requirement to use the XDK. It's a nice tool for creating a layout, and it's there for your convenience, but not as a requirement. So now, of course, I lost track of what my one was that I was going to use for. Let me go back to that. Yes. Did I go past it? Okay. There it is. So it does help. Am I on the right file? Yeah. Oh, I switched it. Yeah. So I can switch back. I can go look at the code directly if I want to. So it's got. Let me do it this. So there's these widgets down here that I can drag and drop and place on here in the different locations. This particular one has just been designed to have a little bit of responsiveness to it. You'll notice that I've got 2 columns in this view and 1 column in the other. So that's the only trick I've done. And then you notice I'm changing some colors down below. That's all that's been done with this particular layout.
Do you provide advice on how you organize this?
Can you ask the question?
Do you make suggestions about how you organize this?
So the question is, do you provide suggestions as to how it will read out? And I assume you mean, do you, the developer, control that? Yes. So that little, you see that little triangle up there, that's a media query point. And you can have more than one of these things up there, and it's generating media query. And it's using less to generate the files and so forth. So you can look inside and see the less, and you'll see exactly what it does. But it's using standard media query stuff to do this. Likewise, you can go in and you can play with some standard properties that are applied to these. One of these down here, so you can see, which one is it? It's been a while since I played with it. Yeah, so you can see I can specify some color changes based on a media query point and so forth. And what's probably more interesting is that I can, let's go back to the other one. Where was it? It's got a nice service feature. A lot of the services are being provided through Mashery, but it's not exclusive to services provided by Mashery. So what we've got here, let's go that way. What I've done is these have been linked to some kind of JSON or some JavaScript bundles that will perform a service request and then return the values. And there's a really nice little tool here. This is Service Explorer. And so, and again, we've got such a cramped screen here. So let's try searching for INT. So it's doing a service call, and here's the response it got. So it did a search for all stocks that this particular service doesn't require an API key, so it's easy to use. It's doing a search for the symbol int, and these are all the JSON values that return. And what I can do is I can go say, well, you know, I don't want that one. I want this, and I want this, and I want this other one, and then I can create a binding. So what I've done is, yeah, there's already one there. What I've done is I have bundled up, I've said, let's put together some JavaScript that will issue that call. And if I look at the details here, it'll show us the calls that were made. Issue this call with those parameters, return, and then in my return value, that my return JavaScript function, it'll just give me those methods, so I don't have to crawl through all this stuff and figure it out. If you've got your own web server with services, you can build an equivalent through this tool to service those, and then give those to some of your colleagues to use, so they don't have to figure it out. So that's a nice little convenience there. Obviously, you're going to want to do more than just have static data going in here, so there is actually a mechanism available to turn that into a variable that you put in there, so that you know, it could be something you enter. So that's a very nice feature here. And that's not limited to use, again, with this app designer. When I select that service, I can also create a JavaScript bundle that I can use within my own code that I'm writing myself. So, or if you just do it, you want to do it by hand, go ahead and do it by hand. There's nothing preventing you. This is just an aid. It's not a requirement. Okay, so I hope I got you a sense of what this layout tool and services are and so forth. Again, I apologize. I'm not the best at that particular part of it, demoing it. So if there are questions, please come up to me and I will get answers for you regarding it. But probably the best way is to give it a try. Yes?
Can you tell me a little bit about Intel's motivation for putting this product out and sharing it?
Sure. So the question is, what's Intel's motivation behind this? And the Intel XDK, so Intel software, the group that I'm part of, has traditionally been an enabler for Intel platforms. So there's a lot of software coming out of Intel, but most of it's very hidden, low-level stuff that you never see. You know, working directly with companies like Apple and Microsoft and Adobe and Google and Mozilla and a lot of people to enable platform-specific features. And so this is also one of those tools, but it's a little bit more visible than typical, because ultimately, for example, if we go to the project page, you'll see there's a nice example. This is this app security API. If you go, the tool is meant for ARM and Intel platforms. Obviously, Cordova. It's not meant to be exclusive to x86 platforms, and we're very interested in HTML5 as a platform on mobile devices. So we want to be involved in that and helping to helping it to succeed. But also, when we're talking about a tool like this, we're talking to a class of developers that Intel hasn't typically spoken to before, and also ultimately, as the tool evolves, giving them a means by which they can take advantage of platform-specific features, not at the expense of the others. For example, the security API, that's an internal Intel mechanism for securing data and information within your app. The goal of that particular API is it will always provide a certain level of security across all platforms, but on certain Intel hardware platforms, it may be able to provide an even greater level of security. So for some environments, certain IT environments or something like that, they may have a requirement that a particular platform be used because they need that extra added security. Maybe a financial house or something like that. So it's an enabler and a way for Intel to provide a visibility of the Intel mobile platforms in the web development marketplace. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was trying to make that connection.
Yeah. So there's a lot of software going on, but as I said, most of it's very low level behind the scenes, and you don't see it. So this one's just a lot more visible, but it still has similar similar incentives behind it. So yes. Yes, the goal is to provide support for all mobile phone, tablet platforms as, you know, that we consider to be relevant in the marketplace. And in addition, as we're able to, as the tool evolves, we'll provide also some x86 enabling features, but not at the exclusion of, you know, for example, there's some interesting things with Mirrorcast that can be done. Some of the Intel hardware's got extra features, so a plugin that supports that would be one of the plugins that we would try to enable more readily, but it would still have to work. Any of those pieces of software are going to have to work across all platforms, and nobody's going to incorporate them into their platforms. We know that. So. So beyond the editing and layout features, there's test debug are really very useful features. Now, again, we're talking about some standard tools here. Oh, I want to move to a different project. So let me switch here. Let's go to this one. So here's an amazing UI design. I'm sure you'll agree. This is actually just designed for simple testing. So this is just Ripple Emulator captive in here, but it's been augmented. So if you've been using Ripple Emulator, for example, in your Chrome browser, this is just another way to get to it, and it's frankly a lot easier to get to it this way. So even if you used it just for this purpose, it's worth downloading. It's been augmented with some Intel XDK. So there's a group of APIs called Intel XDK that came out of a legacy product that we refer to now as a legacy product. It was a product from AppMobi, which was the first iteration of the Intel XDK. It was a product from AppMobi before we purchased that product from them. We didn't purchase the company, but we purchased that product, and a group of engineers came with it. So Tony's one of the folks that came out of that acquisition. Yep, he's a paid-for man. So, so those APIs have been augmented in here in order to support those customers that have been using them. But we're trying to move folks to just using the Cordova APIs, and we've in fact deprecated a group of those. We'll probably go through and respin some of the other remaining plugins in order to pull out the ones that are duplication of what's already available in either the core Cordova plugins or some of the more popular plugins, and then just keep that which you can't find anywhere else. So other than that, it's Ripple. You know, it's Ripple with a few bug fixes and things like that, which means that you know, I can play around with the APIs. You know, if you played with Ripple, you know, okay, I'm tilting the phone left, right, up, down, and so forth, and I get my values. I can play with the compass. So I'm just playing with a few of the obvious ones here. So this allows me to do some debugging, quick and dirty. It contains, as you probably, you know, if you're running this in the Chrome browser, you get Chrome DevTools. Well, you get it here as well. So you can pull that up and play with the Chrome Dev Tools. It's a little hard to see here with just the single screen, but that's the Chrome Dev Tools inside of the Ripple, in this encapsulated Ripple browser. Now, one thing to keep in mind if you're using this is an extremely optimistic mobile device we're looking at here. You don't own this device, even though it looks like it's a Nexus 4, or if I switch it to look like an iPhone, 4S. This is not the iPhone 4S that's in your grandma's pocket. This is a Chrome desktop browser running this stuff. It's got a user agent that tries to pretend it's an iPhone, and it's got a viewport that's pretty close approximation to it, and it's got this beautiful little frame around it that looks, but beyond that, it is not an iPhone. So keep that in mind if you're using this. This is a tool, this is a quick and dirty debug scheme that makes it easier to do some debugging on an app that contains some Cordova APIs. Now, at the moment, this tool only contains those core APIs. If you throw in a third-party API like a status bar API or a Bluetooth or something like that, this thing's not gonna see it. We are working on trying to incorporate a way to support that kind of a thing. Obviously, to get pure emulation, you'd have to do some simulation on the back end. So we're trying to come up with ways to make that somewhat emulatable there, but I think there's even better solutions. So that's the Ripple emulator. Next step you can go through is you can use Winery, and so that's all we're showing here. There's two ways to use it. One is the more standard approach you would use, which is to grab your script, your unique script tag, throw it into the index HTML file, push this up to the cloud, and then our cloud-based server will act as the Winery host. And we'll see if we can make it work here. Sometimes this doesn't work so well in these crowded. Like some of the other tools, PhoneGap's got I can't remember what they call it, the app developer app, and then Telerik was showing theirs earlier. So we've got something called App Preview. Where is it? Right there. And it's an app that comes from the store, Android, iOS, and Windows Phone 8 and Windows 8, that can then see your account. So I can log in with this app. I can see all the projects I've pushed, and I can pull these down. So for example, I just pushed, hello. So let me bring that in here. And so what it's going to do, so it's a pre-built Cordova app that's missing the HTML5 parts. It's got the plugins and the JavaScript for the plugins, but your code that you're working on is missing. And so you can see it started up here. And now I'm running. I didn't insert the Winery script in this one, so I can't actually start up the console. But I am in fact. You can see like it was, but it's kind of hard to see, but you can see red numbers up there. I pushed the accelerometer like it did in the emulator. And so you're getting the same result here. I'm now actually running on a real device, obviously. So I got a much better simulation here. If I insert the Winery script, I can then do standard Winery console debugging with this through this mechanism. You can even bake that into an app and start it up and use the console that way too. That's a little trick you can do. In this case, no, you still have that restriction because that's a pre-built container, so it doesn't contain any third-party stuff. It's like the emulator in the sense that it's just got the core. So it's got all of those core plus the XDK APIs in there. So you're still at a disadvantage when you're trying to debug, but I will get into how you can go about doing that. So that's similar to what you've seen from some other tools as well. Very, very handy. We're actually looking at how to create a custom version of that so that it would incorporate your set of plugins. We don't have anything like that now, but it is something we would like to deliver to make it a much more flexible, usable. And the nice thing about that is you can push stuff pretty quickly. You'll notice up here there's a little Wi-Fi button. When you use the Wi-Fi button, all that's happened is the Winery server is now in the XDK. I can't do it here because I don't have These are isolated devices on the Wi-Fi, so they can't actually see each other, and I don't have a hardware to create a hotspot, so I'm kind of screwed. But for the demo, but if I did it that way, it tends to actually work a little better because there's a lot less lag. And so if you're on a local, if you're like in your home network or a small office network, you can typically get away with that. Some bigger Wi-Fi networks like Intel, for example, doesn't work. So, but that's just the way it is. But same process. And by the way, while I'm talking about that, I should mention that taking advantage of that are a couple of tools here, which I unfortunately can't demo because of the Wi-Fi situation here. But there's something called Run My App, which basically just does what I did. It just pushes quickly, and as I'm editing within brackets, so this is something that does require brackets. I can't do with just any, oh no, I take that back. This one I can do with either brackets or my own editor. It's watching for file save. So if I go and I make some modifications to a save, it'll push that file over and then restart the app. So it's a very quick turnaround on trying something, does it work, trying something, does it work. And unfortunately doesn't incorporate the remote debug console, so it's a little schizophrenic that way, but it is a very useful thing for quick try and repeat, try and repeat, try and repeat. Then also what you see here is the live layout editing. That's something that can be done to the browser or to here, and that's a built-in brackets thing. So that's where it's instantaneous changing as on the fly. That's mostly just for layout is all you're going to use that for. Probably the most powerful thing here is Crosswalk and the debug tools that you have with Crosswalk. Now, Crosswalk is just a version of Chrome or the Blink system that's been redeployed as a replaceable web view on Android and Tizen, if you've ever heard of that. So you actually have, with the tool, you actually, do I have only a couple minutes left here? Is that where we are? What's my timeout on this? What's that? And I get till 3:20? Oh. Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. I get like an hour and a half. Oh, geez. I could talk slower. Okay. So I was afraid I was running out of time. I was trying to speed up here. Okay. So we actually have two Android options here. One is Crosswalk and one is Android, standard Cordova. So in the standard Cordova scenario, you're using the web view that's on the device. And as experienced Cordova application developers, which I know all of you are, I can see you smiling with agreement that you're experienced. You know that when I'm on Android, it's a nightmare. Every web view is different, whether I'm talking about 2.3, 4.0, 4.1, Samsung, HTC. I mean, they're just all over the map. There's a little bit of consistency, but it's a problem. And then when I get to 4.4, it's way different than what's in those others. And then when we go to L or 5 or whatever, Lollipop, I guess is the only official name we have, it's way different again. But it's an evolution of what's in 4.4. But it's even better. I mean, 4.4 and L is a massive improvement over what's been there. But you still have to struggle with 4.3 and below. That's a big problem. So the big advantage to Crosswalk, let me just start this thing up here. The big advantage to Crosswalk is that it replaces the web view on those things, on a 4.0 and above. It can't replace it on 2.3 for the same reason that you can't install Chrome Mobile on your 2.3 devices. But on a 4.0 and higher device, including 4.4, and I haven't, not sure if it's been tested yet on a Lollipop, but it should work there. You will then be able to include the web view as part of your app. Oh, sorry. And you'll be able to include the web view as part of your app, so you know precisely what the features and functions and characteristics are when you deliver that app on Android. Now, unfortunately, we're not able to do that on iOS and Windows 8 for a variety of technical and legal reasons, but we can do it on Android. Fortunately, Android is the place that needs it the worst. So it's kind of a +1, -1 there. You know, the web views are much better on the iOS and the Windows devices as it stands, so it's less of a problem. But this helps a lot. Now, what I've done is I've got this debug tab actually uses Crosswalk as its debug environment. So when you're using the debug tab, you're actually debugging on Crosswalk. And it doesn't, and I can do this on any Android 4 device. It's not restricted to, for example, using 4.4 and then doing remote Chrome DevTools. I'm basically doing remote Chrome DevTools. You see up there, and let me just for the viewing audience at home, we'll bring up, that's what they're seeing on the screen that I'm holding up in my hand. So that's just a screencast of the actual device. You can see as I move it here. So, and I'll start up. So it's actually, you know, viewing, it's actually reading real data. So this is rendering and behaving exactly like when you do the build. Again, you asked about the question with the plugins. Still got a problem there because, so this is a pre-configured build that's got all those plugins in it, just like App Preview. This is just called App Preview X. And it's got still a pre-configured set of plugins. In fact, I got some code down here that even lists them out here. Oh, well, but, yep. So, so you're still, there's still a limitation there. Now, fortunately, we've enabled, and I could show it here if we need to, but I probably won't. We have enabled the ability to build a debug version of Crosswalk. So you can, when you go to do your build, you can enable that. So let me show you where that's done. Where's the file? There it is. So as part of does everybody follow what I was talking about here with the debug and so forth? I mean, this all makes sense to everybody. Do I need to go further into detail? You got, I mean, when we're over here, this is remote Chrome DevTools. Everything you can do with Chrome DevTools, you can do here with your app. So that makes sense, right? Okay, okay. So if I'm now going to deal with debugging an app that's got third-party plugins in it, then at the moment, until we've got a way, for example, to build a custom version of these app preview apps, your alternative is to turn on this debuggable true up here that you can hopefully see. So turn that on in this additions file. So the way that we perform a build, I alluded to earlier that we send to the cloud. So we've got a Cordova CLI system sitting up on a virtual machine up in the cloud, and it's sitting up on a Mac, an array of Macs up in the cloud, and then a virtual machine for the Windows builds and so forth. That means that unlike when you're using Cordova CLI, where you basically, when you pull in a plugin, you're more or less, depending on how the plugin is configured, but most of them are configured such that they kind of get spread across all the platforms you've got in your build, or you've got to, have a project on a Windows machine and have a project on a Mac machine and, manage it that way. It actually creates a project and then does build on that project. So we're able to control, do some subtraction and addition. So let me switch to a different project here. Let's show you, try to explain what I mean by that. Where is it? Test third party. There it is. So in this case, oops, sorry. So in this case, you see I've got that debuggable true up there. So that's going to generate for me whether I build the Android Cordova or I build the Crosswalk, it's going to create a debuggable version. So I can sideload that debuggable version onto my device, hook it up to the USB, that's why I got the USB here, and then start up remote Chrome DevTools and talk to it. So now I got a way to debug that third-party plugin-based app. it's a little slower cycle than having the app preview there and just shoving the stuff into it and playing with it and pushing it again and again. But as we're able to come up with a custom app preview, that will be able to speed that cycle up. But until then, this is a good way to get to it. But in this little app, this is another beautiful app. There we go. I'm just demonstrating some business with third-party plugins. But what I'm doing is I'm actually doing feature detection. We were having a discussion about this earlier in order to detect whether or not they're there. But the only way I can get away with that is I have to exclude those plugins from those platforms I know can't support it. Because typically in CLI, the way the plugins are structured, they'll include the JavaScript even though there's nothing behind the JavaScript. Now, as Tommy's pointed out, technically you can write a plugin that won't do that, but there's very few plugins that do it right. So the vast majority of plugins, when you do include them, whether they support the platform or not, the JavaScript code gets included when you do it in CLI. And that would happen here as well if I didn't take advantage of a little thing that we call this additions. And one of the nice things in this additions is I can go in, I can say, you know what, I've got this plugin included, but on, for example, on Windows 8, these plugins don't work. There's no support for them, so I'm just going to exclude them, and then I can use feature detection. So then on my platform, I can effectively do like platform-specific builds by clever usage of, I basically have to select all the plugins on my project page. So for this particular project, I've got these plugins, these core plugins selected, and I've also gone in and I've added these third-party plugins. And I add these third-party plugins either by referencing a local plugin that I've cloned off of GitHub, referencing the GitHub repo itself, or referencing the registry, any one of those three options. And the XDK will pull it in and ship it up to the build system when you do the build. So your plugin can be private. That is, it could be a local copy of source on your system in a plugin format, and we can ship it up. So you don't have to share it out on open source, or it could be an open source Git repo, or it could be something from one of the registries, any one of those. So I need to include them all, and then I can go back and exclude them on a platform by platform basis, the ones that don't belong. And then I can write my code to use feature detection to say, you know, I can figure out what platform I'm on by, say, looking at user agent, and I can also then determine, is this feature available, and then write my code to maybe have an alternative path, or maybe even use a second plugin that I exclude from the other platforms. You know, for example, like push notification, you might want to do that. You might have push notification for Android that's very Android specific, and another one for Apple that uses Apple features. And so this would be a way to do that. So I think that's a really kind of a hidden but really strong feature of the XDK that I think you know, is a little harder to deal with if you're doing this with CLI. So, and it's just because of the way that we perform the builds. As I mentioned before, you can in fact do builds locally, but the settings that you specify in here aren't seen by that config XML. We're not using that config XML. We're creating our own special. You can hardly see it because I've got them in a git ignore, but when we do a build, where is that? When we do a build, we generate something that's very similar to the config XML that we shove up, that we send up, and each one's a platform specific. So that's how we can, you know, get away. But these are auto-generated, so we have the additions to add to that. They do it combining. That's not important, but anyway.
So when you get to the point where you test and debug and you're ready to beta test on the real device, how can you use this to do the build, or you have to go back to the X?
So the question is, when you get to the point where you want to test and build basically a complete application, you feel like, okay, I got this down, I want to actually deploy a real application, but not necessarily in the store on a device. Then you can use the build system to make that build. For Android, of course, all you need to do is enable the side loading, you know, disable market only, and push it onto the device. You could mail somebody a link to it and they could download it. For iOS, you need to have a provisions file set up so that you can install it on that device and then you can run it. And for Windows Phone 8, they've got a really cool little beta test mechanism in your account that you can use, which I think Google has now in Google Play, but I haven't really figured it out. But the Windows Phone 8 one works quite well. You can submit your app into the store as like an alpha, or I can't remember if they call it alpha, beta, or both, but anyway, basically as a beta test variant, and you can add accounts of devices or people that you want to test it, and then they can see it in the store and they can download and install and run it. It works very nice, actually. And then you can go update it there and they'll see the updates. So I kind of wish the other stores had. Do they? Okay. Okay. Oh, so yeah, so Microsoft just has the beta and Google has the alpha beta. I haven't tried it.
The answer to the question is that, yeah, you can build the app to install on device from the XDK using the cloud.
Yeah.
It's always to point out that on iOS, you have to do, Apple's restricted about what devices you're allowed to install on. So you have to have the right extra provisioning associated with your project before you can build it and install it. Yeah, you can build, right. You don't have to have Eclipse or be able to run on
Yeah, you don't need to have Eclipse. I've gone through and successfully on a Windows machine gone through and created all the certs and everything on the Apple, for the Apple to do the build. There's one step in particular that's a little hard, but you can do it without a Mac. Yeah, but you say it again. So we've got some documentation, but we need to update it. So, what was I going to say? You do still need to become a developer, though. So you got to create a developer account, just like you do have to do with CLI. We don't eliminate that step. We can't eliminate the step. We can't submit automatically to the store for you. So you're still once you get the build. I mean, you can when you perform a build, you download the IPA and APK and so forth, and then go through those steps. You got to pay Apple $99 a year, and so forth. So that doesn't go away. Right. You don't have to go to. You will not have to install Xcode on a machine. You will not even have to have a Mac, other than the submission process does require a Mac, access to a Mac. And apparently there's folks out there that you can pay to submit this for me, under my credentials. So, but, so yeah, we can't break all of those yet. So, so again, yes.
Quick question. Can you go back to the Intel specific Intel XDK HTML5?
Sure. This thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
This got generated from the Intel XDK configuration.
This file is the equivalent of your config.xml.
It got generated from the UI.
Yeah.
So if you go to the plugin settings.
Yeah, I'll repeat that on here so the recording can hear it. So it got generated by the XDK as a result of settings that are in these project settings here. You got down here, if we go down here below, we've got this thing called build settings. So here's where we can set our app ID, name, what level of, what our version code is, what level of CLI we want to use, and so forth.
But when you actually generate the APK, it's going to have just one thing, right? Because Cordova uses that runtime. So eventually you would generate a config.xml probably during the basic.
Yes, so the question is there a config.xml that's actually generated? Because this is not named. Yes, the build system takes this and translates it into, because there's some Intel XDK specific directives in here, just like PhoneGap will have some. So we've got some similar ones, and then that gets translated into a config.xml that CLI can consume. But you'll never see that. That's in the cloud.
The reason is the use cases that I really want to see, because say I'm a developer
So, okay. So the question or statement is, I want that config XML that's generated for the build system because I need to be able to share it with a developer who's not using the XDK. I could imagine there's a way to get it there. I mean, it's obviously would require some mods to the way our build system works. We're actually working on supplying a full error log. Right now, one of the problems with the build is sometimes you get very obscure errors and you don't know what you did wrong. It could go along with something like that. Download the error log and download the config XML that was generated, which frankly could be very useful for understanding maybe some of the errors too. So it's something that we could look into adding, but today, no, we don't provide that. You don't, when you download your APK, it doesn't come alongside, you just get the APK. Although, is it inside the?
I mean, there's more than one config XML, right? I mean, so there's the one that's in the root of the project, the project version, and so that gets processed and copied into on Android. That's going to end up as ResXML, config XML. So I mean, that's bundled with the APK. So if you use a tool to unpack the APK, like there's one that's called APK tool, you can get to the platform specific config XML. But I think maybe what you want is the one. I'm not sure what the other guy's doing. If he's just using Word CLI and you want to be able to switch back and forth between.
Well, here's the thing. So think of multiple developers working on the same project. The product sources and the source control. I use XDK, the other developer does not have to, or we can have it, everybody uses it. So I make the change, and the change is I want to add push button. So the change is really great in config XML because I enter a plugin tag, and I commit to the repository. The other guy checks out config XML, he gets it. So if I was not XDK, using XDK, then this would work. If I'm using XDK,
Yeah, right. I got what you're saying. Seriously, the problem is that we add to our XDK specific metadata, but it doesn't update.
I think all the developers would be using XDK in that case.
Yeah, so just for the benefit of the recording, basically the discussion was I'm working with somebody who isn't using XDK, I'm using it. I need a way for that config XML that directs a CLI to be included in the project so that when I push it to a Git repo, he can get it and he can build using CLI the same thing that I built using XDK, correct? Yeah.
You can achieve that by exporting. So whenever the user is, whenever you're generating this file, it can be a pre-built step where you generate the config.
Right. No, there's a variety of ways you could get to it. Yeah. So we'll definitely take it back as some discussion and see if there's a way to deal with it. But
actually, if you're using the Chrome CLI, then that root config XML doesn't have your plugins anyway. That's kind of why the plugin stuff from the command line.
oh yeah. CLI has got it already in the directory structure. Yeah.
The plugins coming across unless you have like the entire platform's directory.
Yes.
Source file.
Yeah.
So you still have to have some other step.
Yeah. So for the recording, Tommy points out that in fact the config XML that's in there doesn't actually contain some of that information because it's part of the whole project directory structure. Yeah. So it's a more complicated problem than just yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yeah. So we're certainly not going to solve that problem, at least not in the next iteration of this. But let me make sure I didn't forget anything here. We went over app preview as much as we can, giving our Wi-Fi here, and you saw the Crosswalk debug. The debug tab is essentially Crosswalk. I didn't talk about the profile tab here. I'll mention it. But so when you're here in debug with the Crosswalk debug, you have the you have access to the standard profiling tools that are part of remote Chrome Dev Tools, so those don't go away. So this profile tab that's right here is actually a different profiler. It's a low-level performance profiler, and for most apps, it's not something you're going to use. For example, it's not going to help you if you've got some really bad jQuery mobile in there that's slowing things down. It's not going to help you isolate that. What it'll help you isolate is if you've got some JavaScript that's really working its heart off, or you're having trouble with something getting stuck and really doing a lot of processing, it'll help you maybe isolate that. It's more useful for, say, high-performance game developers. They could use it to figure out where they're going on. But essentially, when you run it, you use it, and you you hit recording, you start interacting with your tool, with your app, stop recording, and it'll give you a histogram showing where most of the CPU cycles are at. So it's a very traditional kind of profiler like that. But the vast majority of developers don't really need to use it. There's many other things they can work on. App preview lab. So, and we, yeah. So on this build tab. So these are all pure Cordova, and that Crosswalk, by the way, obviously includes Cordova in it. So you can go. The Crosswalk project is an open source project that's driven by Intel. You can go download it and you can do these builds yourselves. We do have a couple of customers who do that because they've got some tweaks they want to do themselves. They still use the XDK for like debugging and general development, but then they in some cases they actually do that build themselves with a Crosswalk. But that's a hell of a lot of stuff to install. Oh, okay.
No, I mean, say also 4.0.
Yes, in the 4.0 platform, I think it's called, not CLI 4.0, but when Android 4.0 platform is released, it's supposed to include replaceable web views, and Crosswalk will be one of those. The Crosswalk guys are working closely with the Cordova team to get that, and I believe there's also a Gecko, a Mozilla replaceable web view in there as well. That one's, say again? Okay, but there's a possibility of a couple of replaceable web views. But I got to say, I mean, I've seen so many situations where people are having trouble with Android, and by and large, the solution is build with Crosswalk, and the problem goes away. It's so much more consistent. It's got the features you're expecting to see that you're used to seeing on desktop browsers and so forth. It really works well. There is one penalty, 2 penalties, 3 penalties? No. There are 2 primary penalties. One is the size of your app that gets downloaded from the store is about roughly 15 meg larger than it would be if you didn't include the web view. That's because there's a browser shoved in there with it. And because there's a browser, there's a bunch of binary code in there too. So penalty 2 is there's an ARM version that you get when you build, and there's an x86 version that you get when you build. Now, some people look at that and think, oh my God, how do I deal with this? It's actually quite easy. When we do the build, we generate we add some numbers to the version code to force the version code numbers to be such and such, to be structured such that when your customer goes to the store and requests your app, they will get the right version. So if they've got an x86 device, they will get the x86 version. If they've got an ARM, they will get the ARM. If you don't put them both in there, then they'll get the only one that's there, and those people who have the wrong architecture are going to get an app that goes, and they can't figure out what's wrong, and they say something's wrong with your app. And what's wrong with your app is that you didn't put both architectures up in the store. So it's really worth your time to see how to do that. It's actually quite easy. And in fact, you can even put a third one in there to handle Android 2.x if you want to, a defeatured. I've written up something on the forum, but I need to turn it into an article on how to do that. But it's very, very easy. And that's done through a combination of Crosswalk and then also how you specify these min and target versions on the Android here is the trick. So.
So would you have to, the two different apps on the app, on the Google Play Store, or is it one app?
So the question is, do you have to put two different apps in the Play Store? No, there's only one, quote, app on the Play Store. From the user's perspective, they just see one app entry. There's just multiple variants in the App Store, and the App Store is clever enough to pick, to deliver the one that's the best match for the device. You can have like 15, I don't know what the limit is, but you can have a lot of variants to cover, like having specific GPU features, having specific form factor features, having specific device features. So you can go you can go wild with it. I don't encourage you to do that, but that can be done. So yes.
Just if you want to find the documentation about it, I think it's look for multiple APK.
In, yeah, in fact, when you do a build, there's a link on the build page after you download that will take you to a doc that we've got that gives a fair amount of the information, but to learn more. Yes?
Crosswalk replaces the browser feature?
Yes, well, Crosswalk provides an alternative. It doesn't replace it on the device. So the only... For the app, yes. So it gets delivered with the app, and when the app runs, it uses the one that's delivered with it. So that, in fact, guarantees. So even though when you get to Android L, you've got replaceable web views, that you could download, you still have the problem of, well, my customer over in South Dakota it didn't bother to update his web view, but my customer over in Missouri, he did, and I'm getting different behavior because one replaced the web view and one didn't. So even there, I mean, it's a great thing that Google has done. I mean, I'm not bashing or anything like that, but you still may run into a situation where there is enough difference, something about your code is affected by the differences in the different versions. This allows you to say, this is the version it runs on, it will run the same on all the devices unless there's something about the device that's getting in the way. Yes?
Just taking a step back, what is it that Android did for Android L?
Well, the question is, what is it that Android did, or that Google did for Android L? And so in Android 4.4, they vastly upgraded the web view. So prior to that, it was based on this really ancient stuff that was basically part of 2. And they made it, it was based on Chrome Mobile. In 4.4.2, it's Chrome Mobile 30, and in 4.4.4, it's 33. That's the fundamental difference between 4.4.2 and 4.4.4 Android. In L, I think it's based on 36, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. But what they did was, so to get that upgraded, you had to go to, with 4.4.2, they introduced this substantially improved web view that's based off of Chrome Mobile. They removed a few features, but basically it's really good. Then you had to upgrade, you got to get an upgrade to 4.4.4 to get the next version of it. So with Android L, what they did was they said, we don't have to keep updating the firmware. We can actually download a new version of the web view from the store. So with the initial version of L that you see on devices will have whatever that initial version is, but then you'll see updates to that web view through the store. So that's a big improvement. That really is putting, I think, and in addition to what iOS did with 8 with the WK web view, they really improved the performance and feature set in that one. So I think both of them were really good signs to say that HTML5 apps really are now first-class citizens or becoming first-class citizens. Probably they become first-class citizens when there's actually an HTML5 package format that you can install without having to do this native wrapper stuff that Cordova does. That's when they're truly first-class citizens, and then that would imply then there's going to be a full breadth of APIs that cover the feature set from the platform, and the need for Cordova goes away completely. But that's going to take quite a while. So, but I think that was a very strong vote in favor of HTML5 as an app development platform. So I think I covered everything.
Does that make sense? The lollipop change?
Oh yeah, I spent
Yes, it's going to be at least 3 years before, yeah, it's going to be a while. So in the meantime, for the next 3 years at least, Crosswalk is your best friend for Android. So, like I said, xdk.intel.com is the easiest place to go to download this. I'm sorry, that PDF is not true because this is left over from an IDF presentation. I mentioned there's those app preview apps you can get on there. You can just search for Intel App Preview and you can find them. Yeah, I don't think there's any. We did lots of. Here's a obligatory risk and legal disclaimers. Read the fine print at your leisure. So that's all I think I have of this formal presentation. Unless there's any more questions. Yes?
So the only thing I haven't attacked is the whole windows, but things I didn't want to, people have been asking. So will this do the debugging test without me having to go file this phone?
Oh, so the question is debugging and testing on Windows Phone devices. Go buy that $40 Nokia, so you won't have to spend a whole lot of money. You can get it like an AT&T Go phone. You can get it pretty cheap. Or actually, there's a better one that's about $60 or $70. But it is really hard to debug on Windows Phone, and there's not like a remote. There is not. I've confirmed there is not a equivalent to remote Chrome desktop or anything like that. Yeah. So you got to use Winery. You got to use Winery. You can use the app preview, and you can do a lot of debugging there, and put the Winery in it. But as I mentioned earlier, it might have gone by quickly. You can also bake Winery into the built app, and then connect to it through this panel here, through the test panel, or you can even grab this script, and there's a few things you change, and you can do it in a browser if you want to do it that way. Just remember to pull that out before you submit it to a store, because it really raises hell with your app. So don't forget to pull that out. But that's about the best option you have. Sorry, I wish there was something better. So thank you very much.